Good evening. You're listening to the ghostly broadcast, Paranormal Station. I am your host, Timothy, sending out the testimonies of those who have brushed with the supernatural across the airwaves. The movement of goods has been a natural part of human civilization since we first placed crops in the dirt. Things have always needed to get from one place to another, hauled by man, animal, or machine. Tonight, we'll hear the testimonies of European haulage drivers and their paranormal encounters as they ferry their freight across the continent. Our first testimony. Dear Timothy, I've been a long-haul driver for my whole working life. I've seen every corner of the continent and some bizarre things on the side of the road, but nothing quite compares to this. The experience was horrifying. No soul believes me when I recount it. I was coming over the Alps from Austria, heading towards Rome. I'd crossed the border around midnight, and the roads were empty, barren of all traffic. Just me, the truck, and the cargo. I had plenty of hours to drive before stopping, so I planned to be down the mountains by dawn. I'd stop somewhere for breakfast, a shower, and some rest, before making the rest of the way to Rome. As I drove into the cold morning hours, a fog descended. It covered the mountain road in a thick, crispy, cold gray. Even in my heated cab, I could almost feel the chill, like the fog was coming in through the vents. A few miles into the fog, I noticed something strange on the side of the road. At a distant glance, it almost looked like a scarecrow. I wondered what on earth it would be doing here. I slowed down as I was about to pass it to get a better look and saw what it was. It was a man on a cross. I slammed my brakes and brought my wagon to a screeching halt at the side of the road. I donned my jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and ran back to confirm what I'd seen, hoping it wasn't real. When I saw the crucified man up close, I knew it was real. The man was nailed high up on the cross, with his feet at my eye level. He was stripped completely bare. I made the sign of the cross on myself and gasped in disbelief. Who could have done this, and why? The man didn't move. As far as I could tell, he was dead. His wounds were not survivable, and even if he had, it was too cold to last long without clothes on. I checked my phone to try to call the police, but there was no signal up in the mountains. I looked around for a road sign to mark where this was, but the fog was too thick to see anything. I could barely see the rear lights of my truck, and it wasn't that far away. I stared at the dead man one last time, vowing to ensure he wouldn't be left there. Then I turned back, climbed into my cab, and hurried down the road. Exactly 1 mile later, I saw another crucified body. Again, I got out to see if this was real. I couldn't believe it. Another man with grievous wounds was nailed to a cross in the same manner as before. His intestines hung down to the floor like gruesome sausages. When I shined my flashlight on his face, he jerked and gurgled. He was still barely alive. He groaned and rattled without saying anything. I could do nothing to help him. I tried to shout some reassurances, but he groaned and twisted at me to help him. I ran back to my truck and sped off down the road. I had to get some help. Every single mile after that was the same. I saw a cross with a body on it for 40 miles through the awful fog. I thought I was in hell. I thought I'd died in an accident, and this was my purgatory. Graciously, the fog lifted, and I reached the nearest rest stop to call for help. All that came from this was a caution for wasting police time. When the cops checked, they found no sign of what I'd seen in the mountains. Nothing. I know what I saw, Timothy. I didn't hallucinate any of it. Giovanni. Thank you, Giovanni. Due to Judeo-Christian beliefs, it's easy to forget that crucifixion was a horrific method of execution in ancient times and a horrendous thing to witness. Our next testimony comes from Antoni in Poland. Dear Timothy, my name is Antoni, and this is my testimony. I have driven across the continent for most of my life. I know the roads like the back of my hand. I know all the routes, how long they take me and how much time I'll have to stop in certain places. My routines are carefully planned out. Lately, although I've done my best to maintain an active, healthy lifestyle, I've been seeing the signs that I am getting on in age. Aches and pains here, being tired earlier, but I've also been seeing things that are starting to frighten me. The first time it happened, I was heading east to west. I'd just left a rest stop I'd frequented 1,000 times. I saw her a few miles down the familiar stretch of road. I recognized her from years before. I'd picked up the same pretty little blonde 20 years ago at the rest stop. She hadn't aged a day. As I drove past, she was standing on the side of the road, staring at me, her eyes piercing with hatred. As I got closer, I saw a gaping wound on her head. Driving past, she gazed at me with dead eyes in my wing mirror. I shook it off and carried on. A few days later, on another route, I saw another one. Right off a rest stop I knew well. Again, standing on the side of the road was a young brunette I'd met years prior. Her chest burst open from stab wounds, staring at me in the twilight. Everywhere I drove, all my familiar routes were littered with them. I knew every single one of them, remembered all the encounters that I had with them, recalled every second right up until they met their ends. Now, they lined my routes all over the continent on the side of the roads where I buried them. I never believed I'd face my crimes, but there they were, staring at me on the cold, dark roads. There are more than I can count, but every single one brings back the memories of our encounter. All of their final moments are burned onto the back of my eyelids. Their gruesome injuries are visible, as fresh as they were when I inflicted the killing blows. They haunt my roots and my dreams. I'm slowly losing my mind, and I know they will all be waiting for me when my time is up. Now I know the fear that I caused them. I feel it myself. They all seem to know that I haven't got long left. As if death surrounds those close to it, I am scared. I am sorry for what I did to those women, and I know that whatever I have coming, I certainly deserve it. My name is Antoni, and this is my confession. Regards, Antoni. I can't say I thank you for that testimony, Antoni. Still, I can at least appreciate your candor, as I'm sure many others, alive or dead, will. Our next testimony comes from Rolf in Germany. Dear Timothy, I'm pretty new to the haulage industry, and I've only been driving for over a year now. I've already driven a lot of the continent and been learning a lot. When I took on the job, I was placed under the wing of an older driver. He was far from retiring age, but a diet of coffee, energy drinks, and fast food wasn't conducive to healthy living. The guy was a legend in our company. He was funny and good-natured. He had a story for every town, city, and country he'd ever visited. In my first month of riding along with him, we were getting along swimmingly. Of course, it was only a short time before the lifestyle caught up with him. Everyone in the company felt his loss when he passed. In a twisted version of Dead Man's Shoes, I ended up driving his unit along with some of his old routes. A few months later, I'm taking a load across the country. The roads are wet, and it's dark. It was just another quiet evening on the routes. Suddenly I hear a burst and feel the whole wagon shudder. The sour sting of adrenaline coursing instantly through my body shocked me out of my wits. I panicked, and the truck began to skid and slide. I didn't know what to do. The steering wheel was ripped from my hands and jerked sharply to the right. I felt the brake pedal fall from under my foot, and the gear stick moved on its own into a downshift. The truck came to a rapid but controlled stop on the side of the road without me doing a single thing. I panted and shook as I sat there bewildered in the cab. When I'd collected myself, I got out to see what happened. It was precisely what it had sounded like. A trailer wheel had blown out and nearly sent me off the road. I was shaking my head in disbelief, wondering what the hell had just happened. Then, I heard a voice I recognized. "It's just a blowout, kid. Happens to the best of us," came the voice from the cab. I turned to see where the voice was coming from, and there, my old colleague was leaning out the window with that big smile on his face. Dead and buried, but somehow sitting in my cab and smiling at me. "Come on, you'll be all right," he said as he waved me back to the cab. He leaned back inside the window and out of view. I ran to the driver's side and opened the door, but he was gone. There was no sign of him. I don't know what would have happened if he wasn't there. I know it wasn't me who stopped the truck. I was frozen behind the wheel. For all I know, he saved my life when he took the wheel of his old wagon once more. I only hope I can do him proud. Yours, Rolf. Thank you, Rolf, for your testimony. I suppose most of us leave a little piece of our spirits behind in our mortal works, no matter the forms they come in. Our next testimony comes from Chris in France. Dear Timothy, I'm writing to you because I'm not sure who or what it was that I met. I was waiting at the Channel crossing in Calais, bringing a load back to Blighty. The queues were long, so I was stuck there for a while. While I was sitting there, mulling over some coffee and terrible sandwiches that were far too expensive, this guy sat across from me. "Is this seat taken?" he asked. I shrugged and said no, so he took his seat opposite me. "Are you waiting to cross?" I asked him. "Sort of. In a sense, I suppose," he said cryptically. "You're going to Britain, aren't you?" he asked. Did the accent give it away? I asked sarcastically. He just smiled and ignored me. "A lot of people out there seem to want to get to Britain as well," he said as he turned his head towards the migrant camp just beyond the chicken wire fence. There were bodies of men, women, and children, all standing there against the fence, milling around in the cold rain. "Some people need to learn to get there legally," I scoffed. "What makes a person illegal?" he asked. "I'm not getting into this," I said, standing up to leave. "It's a choice you'll have to make tonight, Chris," he said. "What makes a person illegal?" I shrugged him off and ignored him. He could have gotten my name from anywhere, and I wasn't going to be scared by some bleeding heart hippie. I returned to my cab to lie on my sleeper until I was called up to go. I got the word that the ferry was ready, so I drove to the boarding line without waiting around and was glad to finally be on my way. At the final checks, I was prompted to get out and check the trailer with the UK Border Force. It's late. The guy is clearly cheesed off about the weather and is happy for me to open it up and check while he stands under a shelter. I opened the trailer, and a cowering family was right in front of me. a woman holding an infant to her breast and a man shielding them both from me. They had a desperate fear in their eyes. They knew the game was up. "Anything to declare?" the inspector shouted over to me. I hesitated for a second. They begged me with a gaze, not saying a single word. I took the trailer door in my hand and gently shut it. "Nothing, mate. It's all good," I shouted to the inspector. I crossed the channel, drove about 20 miles north of Dover, and then stopped at a service station to use the facilities. The trailer door was ajar when I returned to my truck, and the family was gone. I know what I did was illegal. I'm fully aware that I could lose my license and never drive HGVs again. But that guy, he knew me inside and out. He knew that I couldn't turn them in. It's easy to assert how you'd act when you don't have to see it with your own eyes. When you're not the one who makes that decision, but for that family, I did. I made a decision. I know in my heart that I made the right choice. Yours sincerely, Chris. Thank you, Chris, for that honest testimony. The spirit world does not care for our malleable, ever-changing borders. It moves with all humans from across our world. That concludes tonight's broadcast. You've been listening to the ghostly broadcast, Paranormal Station. I've been your host, Timothy. If you enjoyed this broadcast and would like to be notified of our latest ones, like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. Join us on our trips into the misty, unknown parts of the human condition, where our normal rules no longer apply and the spirits have their way. Good evening, and sleep soundly, dear listeners.